Chapter 4. A Pal with a Pipe. When it came to headaches, Grog was an experienced connoisseur. In fact, he'd woken up with some kind of headache almost every morning since quitting the army and hitting the bottle. He'd had dull headaches and throbbing headaches, headaches that sat behind his eyes, and ones which dug into the back of his cranium, ones that went away when he drank, and ones that didn't. Grog had long believed that he'd experienced every sort of headache a dwarf could feel. This belief evaporated when he regained consciousness in a dim, unfamiliar room, and felt like the sharp side of an invisible axe was being pressed into the side of his skull by an invisible mountain giant. "Oh, God," he groaned as morning sunlight snuck in through the slits of his barely opened eyes and stabbed him in the brain. "Oh, shit," he moaned as the ruthless, non-existent giant shoved the invisible axe through the bandages that enveloped Grog's noggin. "Take it slow, Grog," a vaguely familiar voice said from somewhere nearby. "No sudden movements." Grog wanted to tell whoever this stupid dwarf was that he couldn't have made a sudden movement for all the ale in the 13 realms. But all he managed was a pitiful moan. "You're one lucky dwarf, Ironheart," the deep voice said. "If I'd arrived one moment later, you'd have been a goner." Being a goner sounded far preferable to the torture Grog was currently enduring. Apart from his headache, which was almost all-consuming, his left shoulder hurt, and a searing hot pain sliced across his right buttock. Why? Why did his bum hurt so much? Grog tried to remember. "Invaders!" he cried, as images of undead dwarfs and memories of battle flooded his mind. He sat up abruptly. He had time to notice that he was seated on a low cot in a small room, and that there were no evil dwarfs in sight. Then he leaned over the edge of the bed and vomited into the straw-covered floor. "What did I say about sudden movements?" chided the smart-arsed voice. "Piss off," Grog said, spitting on the floor, wiping his beard with the back of a ragged sleeve, and gingerly lowering himself back down onto the bed. His headache was now even worse. "Well, if you're going to be rude, I won't let you have any of this." Despite the extra pain he knew it would cause him, Grog opened his eyes a fraction and tried to locate the source of the voice. A small spot of red blossomed in a shadowy corner. Grog focused on it, and the spot resolved into the hot, glowing chamber of a long walnut pipe. The owner of the pipe exhaled a languid cloud of smoke, and through that cloud, Grog made out a pair of onyx eyes set in a white-painted face. "Broughton." "Welcome back, old friend. I was worried about you." "Is that Nathan weed?" Grog asked hopefully. "It is." Broughton stood up, walked across the room, and held out the smoldering pipe. "I expect you'd appreciate a bit." "You're a fucking paragon," Grog said, taking the pipe and turning its mouthpiece toward his lips. "Go easy on it," Broughton said. "That's from the town healer's physic garden. Medicinal grade. Very strong." "Go easy my arse," Grog thought as he sucked mightily on the lip of the pipe. He filled his lips with smoke, held it there a moment, then exhaled with a long, blissful sigh. "Oh, that's the stuff," he said, as his hands and face began to tingle, and a warm, pleasant, melting feeling crept through his arms and legs. It certainly does the job," Broughton agreed, his voice strangely rueful. Grog looked up. With the Nissen weed already numbing his headache, he was able to open his eyes more than a crack, and saw for the first time that beneath his moss-green cape, Broughton's left arm was supported in a sling and heavily bandaged. "Hog's balls, Broughton! What happened to you?" "Same thing that happened to you, except I wasn't lucky enough to take the blow to my head and spend the rest of the fight snoozing peacefully." A small wave of embarrassment washed over Grog. He lowered his eyes and suddenly became very interested in the walnut pipe. He took another pull while Broughton continued speaking. "I took the heavy end of a particularly nasty mace right here." The old lawkeeper patted the bandages over his tricep. "Shattered the bone, pulverized the muscle." Grog kept his eyes downcast as smoke billowed out of his nostrils. "I'm sorry I wasn't more helpful. He shook his head. "I'm not the dwarf I once was." "You've certainly changed since I saw you last," Broughton said. "That's a nice way of saying I've turned into a fat bastard." Grog took another puff on the pipe and offered it back to Broughton. "Aye, you've gotten fat." Broughton took the pipe and smoked in silence for a moment. "But that's not the change I mean." "Well, I've got a few more greys in my beard, and—" "You know I'm not talking about your beard, Grog." "Well, who gives a rat's rectum about me anyway?" Grog said, rolling his virtually pain-free head around on his now strangely elastic-feeling neck. "Tell me what happened last night. Tell me every single detail. What are those things, Broughton? Where did they come from?" "You know they're the same things that attacked us in the fog." "We thought as much. They certainly fit the description given by all the survivors from the Battle of Algon's Pass." "It was no battle." "As for what they are," Broughton continued, ignoring Grog's interjection, "and where they come from, that is something we're hoping to ascertain in the very near future. We have prisoners, although it's proving rather difficult to loosen their tongues." "And where did you come from?" Grog asked, as more and more questions bubbled up in his mind. "What the shit were you doing in Longdale last night? And how did we win? We were outnumbered 20-1. "I was here for the telling," Broughton said, his voice laced with disapproval. "You know, dwarves travel from all over the 13 realms to celebrate our story. But you, not only did you not bother to haul your arse up to the Hall of Legends for this sacred ritual, but you didn't even know it was taking place." "Right, sorry, I forgot about the telling. But I'm here now, so maybe you could tell me a little story about what happened last night?" "Can you walk?" "Maybe." Grog stretched his hairy legs and felt no twangs of pain. "But I'm pretty comfortable. Why don't you pull up that stool and tell me what happened?" "Because it reeks of chunder in here, you great pillock. Is there something wrong with that big red nose of yours?" "I thought the nascent smoke was sort of covering it up," Grog said sheepishly. "No, Grog, it isn't." Broughton walked to the door and pulled it open. "Come on, let's get some air." Grog wasn't sure whether it was because of the town healer's ultra-strong Nissen weed or his head injury, but standing up proved to be a formidable challenge. As he sat on the edge of the bed, he was dismayed to see that both his feet had grown up to an enormous size and were rhythmically pulsing like a frog's throat sac. Despite their great size, he was unable to place them on the floor, since its straw-covered surface kept impertinently moving further and further away from him. "What in the 13 realms are you doing?" Broughton asked. Grog looked up to see his friend's white face creased with frustration. "It's the floor," Grog protested. "It keeps on moving, and my feet are..." He trailed off. "Oh, I think I might have had too much of that pipe." Broughton looked down at the pipe in his hand. "Ancient ones, save me." He walked over to Grog and grabbed him by the upper arm. "Come on, you ridiculous dwarf." Grog allowed himself to be hauled to his feet and guided across the room. They emerged into a long enclosed walkway, which was also covered in straw. And as Grog looked around, he realized where he was. "You put me in the stables? Like a common boor?" "Should we have left you half-naked and bleeding in the middle of the town square?" "Yes," Grog said, haughtily pulling his arm free from Broughton's guiding grip. "I am a very dignified dwarf, don't you know?" He walked toward the sunlight, trying to ignore the fact that the straw all around him had made the odd and rather off-putting decision to turn itself into a million little wriggling yellow worms. Grog's hope that he'd feel better once he was outdoors and away from the immaturely behaving straw was dashed as he stepped out into the town square and was faced with a scene of utter carnage. Collapsed buildings still smoldered on the opposite side of the square. Grim-faced, soot-covered dwarves were picking through the rubble and passing buckets along a line from a large water wagon. Other wagons dotted the square. These ones were being loaded with a far grislier cargo. Clouds of fat mountain flies were already buzzing above them, and above the few remaining dwarf-sized shapes that lay, covered by sacks and sheets, on the cobbled ground. Thin columns of smoke still rose from a number of places in the distance. The air felt heavy with death and despair. It wasn't just Longdale. Broughton had come to stand beside Grog and was looking around the square. Riders arrived this morning from the south, and from Himbrook in the east. No word at all from the west. "I need a drink," Grog said. "Let's go find some ale, and you can tell me how in the netherworlds you managed to win this little dust-up." "Lawkeeper!" The shout came from Grog's right, and he looked over to see a young dwarf wearing a clean grey jerkin striding towards them. "We've been looking everywhere for you, sir. Burgomaster Ardrig requests the honour of your presence immediately." Broughton glared at the young dwarf and took a long pull on his walnut pipe and exhaled slowly. "Does he now?" Grog enjoyed watching every ounce of pomp and self-importance drain from the young messenger's face, like spilled beer firmly squeezed out of a tavern mop. "Well, yes, I'm sorry, but he does." The dwarf looked back and forth between Broughton and Grog. "You see, we've received word that the king is on his way here, and..." "The king?" Broughton asked, taking a step towards the now trembling dwarf. "Yes, sir." "Well, why didn't you say so? Let's go." The messenger took off across the square. Broughton followed, then turned around when he realized that Grog hadn't moved. "Come on, Grog, what are you doing?" "I'm not going to say the bloody Burgomaster," Grog said. "Look at the state of me." He indicated his ripped and filthy night pants, the shapeless brown tunic someone had kindly put on him while he was unconscious, and the bandages wrapped around his skull. "I'm off home to bed. Via the Goblin's Head, I reckon." "Oh, no you're not," Broughton said, and his obsidian dark eyes flashed with anger. You're coming with me. The kingdom needs you, Grog. Oh, it needs a fat, concussed old fool who's off his head on Neeson weed, Grog blurted. That's who it needs, does it? No. Broughton closed the distance between them and reached out with his unbroken arm. He grasped Grog's shoulder with a strong hand and gave him a little shake. No. We need Malgrog Ironheart, chosen champion of High King Owen the Wise, and general of his armies. Grog looked down at the cobblestones and tried to keep the trembling out of his voice. Owen's gone. The least wise thing he ever did was make me a general. Grog, no one blames you for... I said no, Broughton. Grog shook his shoulder free from the lawkeeper's grasp. If there's fighting, I'll be there. But I don't want to talk to a burgomaster or a king. I don't want to be part of any decisions. I don't want to lead. He began storming across the square, towards the road that would lead him to his home. I just want to be left in peace, he called over his shoulder. I know what you want, Malgrog, Broughton shouted after him. And you won't find it in the bottom of a bottle. You want a bet? Grog muttered under his breath as he passed a cart full of dead bodies. Redemption! Broughton's shout echoed around the smoky square, causing many dwarves to stop what they were doing and look up. Come and find me when you're ready to seek it. You can take your redemption, you white-faced bastard, Grog thought as he entered the welcoming shadows of a side alley. And ye can shove it up your arse.